Hello, everyone. Welcome to the long awaited return of It's Time We Talk, and we have got quite the special one today. Um, with the Premier League starting 1 week from when we are recording this video on Friday, August 14th. We are 1 week away from Arsenal versus Coventry on the first day of the season, and we are very excited. I am joined, of course, by the only other man that I know who follows the premise probably more than I do, and that is Mr. Theo Houston Betts. Welcome.
Hello, yes, thank you. A pleasure to be back. Glad that our review of the World Cup didn't come to fruition because I was still a bit too heartbroken about that. But there's enough optimism going into the Premier League for me that I'm
Yeah,
uh, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
yeah. Well, of course, I absolutely. I mean, we'll just brush on this very, very quickly. I think overall, I very much enjoyed the World Cup. I know I found it a little bit weird, moving the 48 teams. And of course, there's been a lot of controversy with FIFA and the World Cup since it ended. But I would say overall, I enjoyed this summer's World Cup. A lot of the matchups I thought weren't going to be good ended up being a lot better than I expected. And, you know, while the final wasn't the best, I would say the lead up to it for me was one of the best I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, definitely. It was a very entertaining tournament, and sometimes with stuff like that, you sort of need a bit of controversy. And thankfully, I'm happy to put this down as this is my opinion, not the opinion of the podcast. But thankfully, you've got some sort of idiot running your country who loves controversy and loves creating it, and
Yeah,
we also have an idiot running FIFA as well who is more than
it's
willing to play along
unfortunate.
with that. So, look, that created a lot of controversy, which creates talking points, which means that fans go into games with a bit more energy, a bit more pep in their step. A lot of rivalries created, a lot of rivalries brought back as well. England
Yeah.
Argentina was a feisty game from that perspective. So,
Mm.
look, a very good example of great entertainment and yeah, I think for all my criticism of FIFA, I'll say that I think the 48 team World Cup worked quite well. But if they try and increase it anymore,
Oh
I'm
my
never going to
God.
be able to
Please
sleep
no.
again because my sleep
Yeah.
schedule over that month and a bit was absolutely torn to pieces. So I need them to not throw any more teams in, please.
Gotcha. All right. Well, international football is done. We are now on to club football. What's gonna have us get right into it? We've been talking for a little bit, but
Mhm.
I want to get into where we think teams are gonna finish, and I think for me, starting with the relegation zone. I mean, for me, this is just a very quick thing. Unfortunately, I think the three teams that came up are gonna do very well to stay up because it's so tough. Coventry, Ipswich, Hull, they're not teams who have had recent experience in the Premier League. I mean, Ipswich maybe, but they didn't really do all that well. And I just think we're gonna have another season, unlike last year, where the three teams that come up come down.
Yeah, I think that that is certainly the most likely scenario at the minute. I think if you look over the last couple of years, there have been candidates for clubs that are likely to sort of collapse or struggle who were in the Premier League the year before. So last year, everyone was looking at Wolves as an example of that. People were looking at Brentford as well because they'd brought in Keith Andrews and lost a lot of players.
Hmm.
Same with Bournemouth; they'd obviously kept Iraola but had lost all of their back line, so there were questions over them. So the teams that came up sort of had this view that okay, there's a couple of teams that we can catch up to here that we can close the gap on. And I think there are teams that look like they'll be weaker this year. Palace have lost their manager and a couple of players. Fulham have changed their transfer strategy quite a lot, relying on young players and a manager who didn't really impress, albeit did get the job at Real Madrid for half a season.
Yep.
Sunderland are going to be sort of battling in Europe as well, and maybe haven't had enough players, but their quality as clubs and as squads is much more intimidating than it was last year with Wolves in particular. I think West Ham will still look back on their squad and think that maybe they should have finished higher than they did.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I think of the three, I don't know what you think about this. I think Coventry probably have the best players. I think Ipswich are probably best suited to the Premier League style, with Gary O'Neill there as well, having performed pretty well in the Premier League in the two jobs that he's had there, managed to keep teams in there, and he signed,
Yep.
rather than signing a lot of young, talented Championship players, which is what they did last time, they've signed players like Issa Diop, who's been there, done that, Sasa Lukic, who's been there, done that
Yep.
for Fulham in the last couple of years, Florentino Luis, who was at Burnley last year, maybe didn't impress as much, but was still very capable of, breaking down attacks. They've also signed a 6'9" goalkeeper in Kjetil Sherpen,
Yeah.
which is just good fun.
That was
Um,
awesome.
Hull are probably the most unknown. They did incredibly well with their backs against the wall to get promoted last year, and sort of managed to do it. Just they were tipped to be relegated in the Championship last year by a lot of people, and somehow managed to turn it into this incredibly successful season. So I'm wary of saying that they look like they could just collapse and fall straight out of the league. That is definitely a distinct possibility, but I think if you're looking at those three teams, who's going to have the most fight in them, who's going to be more likely to rough a couple of teams up and get a point, it could be them. So I don't know what you think, but I think they've all got different ways in which they're competitive, but I'm not sure if that'll be enough.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a good. Speaking about Coventry first, I think this is a great audition for Frank Lampard because I would love for Coventry to stay up and for him to stay there. But if they end up going down, if he goes down with a fight, I think there could be one of these Premier League teams above them that look at Frank Lampard, the job that he's done in the Championship with Coventry, maybe nearly keeps them up or does keep them up, and he decides. I mean, he was almost. I can't remember which team it was. I think it was Palace that was looking at him to replace their former manager, and I think I'm very interested to see how he's going to do now that he's got himself a Premier League job again. Because last time, I know the first time that he was interim at Chelsea did well, but came back and it wasn't all that great for him. But he's had a long time since then. This is a brand new project, a different style. You're going from one of the biggest teams in England to a team who have not been in the Premier League in quite some time. So, or if ever, I can't remember. Poor
No,
historian from
so,
me.
so
I can't remember.
Coventry are a team who have a very, very good history, sort of at the top of English football. They've got a long, storied history. They
Yeah.
during the early 2000s, they had a really tough spell where they didn't have sort of even going back up to the 2019s as sort of 2019 and late 2010s. They didn't have a stadium for a while.
Yeah.
So they've had a very, very troubled time of it, really, and managed in the last couple of years to really turn this around. Obviously, Lampard's the one who has managed to get them over the line there, really, but it was Mark Robbins who did such a good job in the first place, sort of slowly dragging them up the divisions. This is a big sort of a peak of effort from them. Going back to 2016, they're in League Two. So this is a huge step in quite a short period of time. New stadium, and something you didn't mention. I think Lampard, can draw on his experience that he had at Everton as well when he was there and was fighting in
True.
relegation scraps with them, trying to keep
True.
them up. So this does feel like, whereas Ipswich have been here fairly recently, Hull aren't really expecting to be here and are just sort of delighted to be along for the ride, although they'll
Yep.
obviously want to stay out. For Coventry, this is the apex of the last 10 years. This is everything that they've worked towards, from being
Yeah.
an incredibly successful club at various points in their history to being in League Two 10 years ago and slowly working themselves back up the tiers. So they'll have a lot riding on this, and Lampard will know that. And I think you're right. I think he'll view it as an opportunity to get back into the Premier League, even if he can't keep them up.
Yeah, and then for me, I mean, the toughest part, I chopped and changed my predictions so much when I was making this. But I would say the bottom half of the table from like 10 or 11 to 17, honestly, it's like throwing a dart onto a dartboard. You just don't know. You just have no idea. because I was getting to the point where I was like, oh, I think this team's going to do well. Oh, but do I think they're going to do better than? Do I think they're going to do better than that? And I chopped and changed so much, and I'm looking at it now, and I still don't like it. But um, I think there are just some teams that I just want to talk about. I mean, I think Fulham grabbing Arvaro Albaloa, if I can speak correctly,
Yeah.
from Real Madrid. I think that is a crazy signing because I don't rate him all that highly, and um, I think he did decent as the interim for Real Madrid. I think that whole last season was so dysfunctional. There's so much going on after the sacking of Xabi Alonso, and grabbing guys like Gonzalo Garcia, who he knows from Real Madrid, and that was one of his projects. He absolutely loved him, and Arbeloa as the manager of the youth setup at Real Madrid will know him and will have a good grasp on the youth at Fulham and be able to help them. I don't know, like I have them in 17th, but that's only because I don't rate Arbeloa and I don't know if he has the quality outside of that
Mhm.
to stay up. I do like guys like Anthony Robinson, and there are some guys on that team that I think are good. But like I said, this is the section of the league where I just have no idea. I'm grabbing at straws here.
No, I think look, you're totally right. This middle pack, if we can even call it a middle, this
Yeah,
encompasses, everyone excluding maybe the top four and the bottom three. So this is the
yeah,
13 middle teams is what we're talking about here, and it's so hard to predict who's going to have a good season and who's not because a couple of injuries, knocks a couple of points off a team's total and that sends them rocketing down maybe three places. So it is tough to balance. I completely agree with you on Fulham. I think Arbeloa obviously lasted longer than Xabi Alonso did last season, which is worth
hmm
noting. And people have been very brazen in suggesting that Chelsea might be able to immediately compete at the top of the league, which if we're going to say that Xabi Alonso's brilliant despite being terrible at Real Madrid, it feels harsh to paint that picture. The reverse with Arbeloa. He did manage to last the season. They did have some decent results. They obviously weren't very good, but the problem with Real Madrid is always managing egos, which is why Mourinho's got the job again. It isn't necessarily because he's some tactical genius, but because they need someone to be able to go in and tell Vinicius and Mbappe to stop asking like egotistical
yeah,
losers and start actually just working together and playing as a
yeah,
team, pressing occasionally. And Arbeloa was never going to be able to do that. Um, there's less ego at Fulham by a big margin, but I do think they've really benefited from having Marco Silva at the helm, and I think it's people have forgotten how good of a manager he is, how capable he is. If you look at this squad of players, there are some talented ones in there, sure, but Leno has been around for years. Wasn't good enough, wasn't better than Ramsdale for Arsenal, wasn't better than
no,
Raya by a long distance, and is a good couple of years older now. Castagna got relegated with Leicester. Joaquim Anderson, Palace were happy to let him go. Calvin Bassey has been good in some games, bad in others. Anthony Robinson, obviously consistent, pretty decent, but at the same time is injured quite
yeah. Just gotta
frequently, so he's
stay
not so
healthy. He
reliable.
does.
Shea Charles, they've just brought in for 30 million. Great player, but very young. Hasn't played in the Premier League much. It's a bold choice. Sander Berger went down with Sheffield United and Burnley at various occasions and now looks to be the only anchor in a midfield, which also is set to include Josh King, who's 19. Seems to be a very good player, very talented, but if you're leaving him and a very young Shea Charles in midfield, it just feels like you're flirting with risk
Yeah,
there. And then going forward again, you've got Garcia, who's 23 and has never been a consistent starting striker in his career. He's looks likely to lead the line. Then you've got Kevin on the left, who's shown he's capable of big moments, but didn't do it very consistently last year. And then Oscar Bob on the right. And there are good players in there, but it's a very inexperienced team, particularly going forward and in midfield as well. And it just feels risky to give that to an you know someone, a manager who also doesn't have that much experience.
Yeah.
So, this could very well be the same as Brentford last year, where everyone said they're going to collapse. Keith Andrews, we've not seen enough of him, la di da. But
Yeah.
I do think Fulham have understandable reasons for being slightly fearful here. But also, I'd forgive them the optimism because if those young players work out, they could be pushing Europe, and in the next couple of years, could even win some sort of tournament. Because if they're all hits, then that's great.
Yeah.
I think the likelihood of them all being hit straight away is pretty low.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you about just it's very much a risk. You brought in Arbeloa, who has in his short managerial career has managed the youth team at Real Madrid, and he knows how to develop talent, and a lot of the young players that we see in the Real Madrid first team now obviously worked under Arbeloa and the youth setup, and there's every possibility that he can get the most out of these players, but it's about can he get it out in such a short period of time in a case where you know you're one of the teams that maybe you're not a favorite to go down, but if Coventry end up on a magnificent run of form, now you're thinking, oh geez, Fulham's been in the league in the Premier League for however long. If you're the person that's at the helm for their collapse, it's going to be
Doesn't
tough
look
for you to
good.
get a job after that.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think the team that I wanted to talk about most in this little pack is Newcastle, because what a summer they've had, and I do not mean that in a good way. Um, it seems like there's been an exorcism of this squad, and I mean all of I guess the most important players and their leaders are pretty much all gone. I mean, you look at the squad now, and I mean, if they had held on to guys like Anthony Gordon and Bruno Guimaraes and
Sandro
oh my
Tonali.
goodness, yeah, Sandro. It's been a lot going on. It's been a lot going on.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
summer's been tough to keep up with, but yeah, you lose so many important first team players, and it's not just like you lose your right back or whatever. No, you're losing like the heartbeat of your midfield in Bruno Guimaraes. You're losing your main defensive midfielder in Tonali. You're losing a player who was probably your best attacker last year in Anthony Gordon, and mo- arguably most importantly, you've lost your manager in Eddie Howe, the man who sort of was at the helm of this resurgence of Newcastle United, and it just seems like they were one of the hardest teams for me to predict because I still think that there is some talent in this squad. I think they are still. I don't think they're in danger of getting relegated. But man, I thought the days of seeing Newcastle in the bottom half of the league, like seeing them lower than 12th, like
Mhm.
I thought we were past that under the ownership of Mike Ashley and
Yeah.
Steve Bruce at the helm. Like I thought we were past this, and now I'm a little nervous for them. I have friends who are Newcastle fans, and I mean they have voiced their displeasure with me about how they feel about their team, and I don't have anything really to say to them because I think they could be in trouble.
Yeah, I've got them written down on my list here as 15th this season,
I also
which
have them as 15th. That's funny.
which is low. And there's a couple of reasons for it. Firstly, I think it's important to note that I don't think Newcastle have been very functional with signings, transfers, and sort of the general backroom area in the last couple of years. They've made some good signings, and I don't want to suggest that Howe has pulled any strings or anything like that, but you basically had a recruitment setup that was built around Eddie Howe. I think his nephew was running the recruitment setup as well, and it felt very much like it was all tied into that one man. And while he did an excellent job of sort of securing results on the pitch, and obviously winning the trophies, I think there was a fair argument there that he was maybe given a bit too much control. And I was expecting to see some of that control taken back over this summer anyway. But I thought after Gordon had gone, that was sort of going to be it for big sales. I thought, okay, 80 million, they've brought the money in that they need to now. They can go out, spend a bit of money, maybe bring in another striker, maybe another left winger, maybe another right back for whenever Livramento is injured, which is half the season, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, and then, when they sold Tonali, I thought, that's 100 million. That's a lot of money for a player who, in my humble opinion, isn't worth 100 million. I think he's a very, very good player. I think that's a massive amount of money to pay out for someone who is very good, but probably 70 million good rather than 100 million good. So I would have sold him then as well. And then it's just the selling Bruno. When you just get to selling Bruno, I just think heaven nor hell could have convinced me to sell him
Yeah.
unless it was for an egregious amount of money. A stupid offer. And I understand, he says he wants to leave and all of these things. But at the very least, you've got to have a backup. You've got to have a backup in mind. And they just don't. And there's too many unknowns about this. They've made some decent signings. Sean Sturr has come in from Ajax. He looks quite good. There's Alaji Bamba as well. Bazumana Toure also. They've got some good signings in, or people who seem to be good signings, but none of them are very old. None of them have very much experience at any top level, never mind the Premier League. And you're relying on Matthias Jaisler to come in as well, who was good at Red Bull Salzburg, a while ago. Very, very good. And then, sort of seemed to be at the top of a lot of clubs' sort of lists when they were looking for new and upcoming managers. Went to Saudi, did very well there. This is going to live and die based on him now. If he comes in and proves himself to be any worse of a manager than Howe, Newcastle really are at risk of being sucked into this. There's still the outside chance they sell Lewis Hall in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
That those rumours have been going very, very strongly, and I don't know now what their line is for selling people. Is everyone for sale there, so long as there's a certain amount hit? And who are they going to bring in to replace them? It's been a fire sale, and if they survive this year, they'll have money to spend in January and next summer, and they will then hopefully be able to invest that a bit smarter than they did last summer, where for my money, they made definitely the worst signing of the whole summer transfer window in signing a 28-year-old Johan Visser for 60 million when he was on his last year of his contract and was refusing to play for Brentford anyway, and was injured and hadn't played pre-season. So, if they can get their transfer activity in line a bit more, they've got more of a chance. But this year feels like it's going to be a write-off, and all they can do is to buy.
Yeah. It is incredible. Like I look at this team and I think to myself, God, like it is an absolute corpse of the team that won the League Cup. I mean, I think I saw an image the other day of like players who are still there, and it's like maybe a handful, but honestly, like they've ripped apart that League Cup winning squad. That was such a huge moment for them, and while I understand the difficulties that they do have with recruitment because last year we saw a bunch of different players linked with them and players choosing to go in other directions. Brian Mbomo ended up going to Manchester United after being linked with Newcastle for a while. João Pedro to Chelsea. And there were just so many different players that they were linked to. Benjamin Sesko. I mean, it just seems like they didn't really have the same pull that they did before last year, and now you've gutted that squad even more, brought in a manager who is unproven in the Premier League and who not many people are expecting to do well. Maybe this is a little bit dramatic, but the bringing in Joslet definitely seems like a Liam Senior type hire where it's somebody that probably Saudi ownership knows well because he's
Yeah.
done well in the Saudi league, and they just want to bring him in because they really can't find anybody else who wants the job at the moment, or anybody else who can come in that quickly.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know. This could be something I don't really see them finishing in a European spot. Maybe they won't finish as low. I think 15th is probably the lowest I could see them finishing.
Yeah.
I think ultimately the most realistic is somewhere between like 10th and 14th, something like that.
Yeah.
But as we move up, I do want to talk about Leeds. Of course, you're a
Mm.
supporter. I want to talk about
Yeah.
after and in what I thought was a pretty great season, staying up and proving alongside Sunderland that teams that come up from the championship, look at that, for the first time in a couple of years
Yeah.
actually stayed up. So um, give me a little bit of your insight of where you have your team and how you think they can build on such a great season back in the Prem.
Well, I think there's an old Japanese proverb here, which I think is going to be worth just starting off with, and that goes, "Don't eat an elephant for lunch." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we have huge goals as a club. The goal is to try and compete for Europe, and try and keep pushing in league and cup scenarios, and keep pushing ourselves up. But if we decide that this year we're going to push for Europe, then we are taking on something that's much, much, much too big for us to deal with at the minute. Which, I know we might get on to talking about Sunderland a little bit, but that's potentially what the scenario that they're in already, with having gained
Yeah,
Europe last year. So the goal for us isn't to push for Europe this year. The goal for us is to get a slightly better squad than the squad that we had last year. Maybe make a couple of younger signings who we believe will be able to either sell for a substantial profit, or will be able to play for us for the next 8 years potentially, as opposed to the next three. And basically just to consolidate ourselves as a Premier League team. I think there will be internal hopes that we can push into the top half. That's certainly the hopes of a lot of the fan base. But the signings have been sensible and in line with this. So Harry Wilson was a great free transfer, great
oh
pickup.
yeah,
We talked about Fulham already. He was Fulham's best performer last season, certainly from an offensive point of view. Managed to get him on a free transfer after flirting with him last season. Finally managed to get him in pre-season. He looks like he's going to be the creative person that we wanted on that right-hand side last year as well, when we went for Facundo Buonanotte back in January from Chelsea, who ended up playing something like 12 minutes.
yeah.
He looks like he is the player that Farker wanted, and he's going to be capable of creating a lot more chances in the attacking third for us. On the other side of that, we obviously lost Pascal Struijk to Brighton, who I think will do a wonderful job there. I think he's one of the more underrated centre-backs in the Premier League, and one of the more underrated players that Leeds have had in the last 10 years. But we've replaced him with someone who is a couple of years younger. We spent 34 million on Tarek Muharemovic, who played in the World Cup for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he looks like a player who is sort of fitting some of the standards of the players we signed last year. He's 6'4", very, very big, capable with his feet, but is likely to be able to just sort of batter people around if we need him to. And then James Trafford, who we've spent a club record amount of money on, but is definitely an upgrade on Carl Darlow last year, who stepped in, it's got to be said, very, very well as quite a veteran player, after Lucas Perry didn't perform up to the standard that we'd hoped when we signed him. So there have been upgrades around the pitch. We're expecting a few more players to come in sort of as backups, but I think the optimism is still really there. It's a well-ranged squad. We've got James Justin, who can step in at centre-back if we want a bit more attacking impetus to come from one of our wider centre-backs. He can also step in at full-back. Sean Longstaff, who was out of the team a lot last year, has had a brilliant pre-season. Looks like back to the player who he was at various points last season. Noah Okafor didn't play much in the World Cup, but coming back fairly fresh. Brendan Aronson, same thing, but what a presser he is, so capable of winning the ball back. You probably want a backup for Calvert-Lewin, but other than that, I think Leeds will be hoping for basically more of the same, particularly that we saw in the second half of the season. If you go back to that Man City game where we lost 3-2, to that Phil Foden goal, from that
Mm-hmm.
point we were incredibly competitive, incredibly difficult to beat, and even when we went on little runs, it was clear that those weren't going to derail us. And I think all we're hoping for is a full season like that. So start from that point against Man City. Don't have the lows that we had before that, and just maybe try and come in around ninth, and just consolidate ourselves really as a Premier League team.
Yeah, that's ultimately I think the goal. You mentioned Sunderland before, and um I think they're an interesting kid. I'll just touch on Leeds for a second because I think what you said was very good. I liked James Trafford was linked with other big six teams like Chelsea, and I know that there was rumblings of, hey, could he stay and hold his place at Man City? What could he do to potentially challenge Donnarumma? He was linked with some other European heavyweights as well. So to be able to grab him on a permanent basis when he's still in his mid 20s, I think that's an incredible signing. Even though I thought the fee was a little steep, but looking into it, I think in this market, and we'll touch on this as we mention, like some of the teams that spent the most money or have spent the most money so far. This window has really taught me that there is no reasonably priced signings anymore. It's you got to be willing to pay what you have to be willing to pay whatever it takes to win a league, to stay in the Champions League, to stay in Europe, and so I think I haven't really looked that much into fees, as in like judging, oh, I think they paid way too much for this player or way too much for that player, because at the end of the day, I think we've seen a lot of big players go for a lot more than what we expected, and we'll touch upon that a little later on. But I'm excited to talk about that because I've seen a lot of the discourse I've seen online regarding signings has been, oh my god, I couldn't imagine paying that much. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to pay that much, then you're gonna there's a certain team I'm thinking about that you might be able to decode, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think going back to Leeds and Sunderland as the two teams that stayed up, I think very similar trajectories for your seasons, but for Sunderland, it's going to be tough with Conference League football because even though people have, said what they say about the Conference League and its competitiveness, I still think having those extra, what is it, eight
Mm-hmm.
league games and then however many games in the knockouts, that adds up when you think about that, the Premier League, and then potentially making runs in the cups and stuff like that. It's. I look at this Sunderland team, and while I do think they did perform very well, and they do have a lot of very good players, do they have the depth? Do they have the squad to handle weekday football? Do they have the squad to be able to handle a conference league game on a Thursday and you know Liverpool away on the Saturday? You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Or on the Sunday, excuse me. I think that is something that makes me want to put Leeds a little bit above Sunderland because I think not having that European football is going to help them slightly. But I find it really interesting when it comes to Sunderland as well. Like how will they be able to handle such a demanding season?
Yeah. Well, that is the question, and I don't really know where to stand on Sunderland. I was really impressed with them last year. They played horrible football a lot of the time. Like if the people that complained about Arsenal's style of play, being very
Yep.
defensive, breaking up play, looking for fouls, looking for opportunities to time waste. Sunderland really did take that to the nth degree. And I'm not saying that from a point of criticism. I'm saying that from a point of look, it worked. You got Europe in your first year back in the Premier League after years of none of the promoted teams being able to stay in the league. It's a phenomenal achievement and is up there with some of the best first seasons back in the Premier League that anyone has seen, certainly in recent years. So it's a remarkable achievement, but they still have a lot of young players. Reggie Labrie has a mixed record as a manager. He did very well at Lens the first time around, but then got sacked the following season. That team had some very, very, very good players in it as well. And now that season that Sunderland got promoted from the Championship, between February and the playoffs, they basically didn't win a game. It felt like there was just this real lack of confidence. And last season, they managed to not tail off at all. It was really, really consistent. And so I'm stuck now because I find it hard to judge, okay, is Labrie a better manager than I anticipated? Is he more consistent? Has this young team got the mentality to be able to compete at this level? It seems as though they do. Players like Alderete has blown me away as a competitive, battling centre back. Xhaka, I don't think many people saw him being as good as he has been since he returned to the Premier League. Brian Brobby is maybe one of the best young strikers in the world, and we saw glimpses of that when he was at Ajax. Sunderland managed to get him for a fairly low price, and he has become a battering ram for them. He is startlingly good. So, with all that said, I've put them in 17th because I just think that the impact of those European games is remarkable. And I don't know
Oh
if
yeah.
a little test for you here, Chris, right? How many players do you think they've signed this summer?
They signed. Spoiler. I did
You
my
know.
research into some.
Wow.
They've only signed one,
One, Thomas Meunier, a backup right
which
back
which
who
is
is
a good
good
signing
player.
because he's had experience.
He's
Not
experienced. He's been there. He's
yeah
played in Europe. But in what way is he really going to be able to help the
yeah
squad balance the burden of those extra 8 games? An extra 8 weeks of the season, they'll be playing midweek weekend. Whereas clubs like, um, you know, either I don't think they'll go down, but even Hull, Coventry, Ipswich won't have those games. Newcastle,
yeah
Leeds, Brentford, Everton, these teams that they're going to be competing with will have less games and have squads with a similar depth. And
yeah.
I think that's a really, really huge burden. And if they do survive and survive comfortably this year, then again, they will have impressed me in the same way they did last year because I think that is such a huge burden on such a young squad of players. And if they do manage that and if they progress, look at the impact that had on Newcastle a couple of years ago when they were competing in Europe. It drops them right down. Look, Chelsea have always deep squads, but always manage to fall off in the league when they're competing in Europe as well. So I just think this will have a huge impact on them this season, and maybe they've got Europe a bit sooner than perhaps they really would have wanted.
Yeah, I mean, you look at for me the two instances that um for me I think of first are the year that Manchester United and Spurs finished 15th and 17th, and that was in the Europa League. And look,
Mm-hmm.
those are again, those might have been one off, once in a lifetime. Oh my, I can't believe that happened. But still, it goes to show that nobody's immune from this. You have to be able to provide a deep squad that is able to withstand 2, 3 games a week. And Sunderland, if they were going to, I mean, they only made one signing, which even if they hadn't had European football, I still think one is horrid. And look, there is still time left. There's still a little less than 3 weeks left in the window, so who knows? I could have my foot in my mouth, and Sunderland could have brought in 4, 5, 6 players since. Probably not, but um, it's an interesting case because they did a great job of signing experienced players, whether they were experienced in another league, some were Premier League experienced or Championship experienced, but they brought it seems like they could have done a lot better with bringing in guys to supplement some of their star players, and they haven't really done that. I don't know what the reason for that is, but Sunderland, I think, are again. I have them in 16th,
Mm-hmm.
but I have them. My reason for putting them in 16th was just because of the cluster of teams, and like I said, I chopped and I had them as high as 13th at one point.
Yeah.
But like I said, who knows? Maybe Labrie takes this team and does absolutely wonderfully, ends up finishing between 10th and 13th. Gets maybe doesn't win the conference league, but takes them pretty deep. who knows? It really is so unknown when you look at this side of when you look at the middle to bottom half of the table. Now I want to talk about we've talked about a lot of the teams. I know we haven't touched on every single team in there, but if we did, this episode would be the length of the Odyssey.
Yeah.
And as much as I love as much as I love talking football with you,
Yeah.
Theo, I don't want to I don't
We've,
want to
we've
be there for that long.
we've got jobs, haven't we? That's fine.
I'm doing yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about we're going to talk a little bit about now the top half of the table, or at
Mhm.
least our predicted top half of the table, and I think so. I talked about Leeds. I have in 10th, and then the other. So I think it's the top 8 now have Europe, or is it the top 7? I can never
I think it,
remember.
it depends
Yeah,
on like who wins the FA Cup and stuff like
that's
that as well.
that's
So
right too.
um, basically, there's tons of them. I think it could go as far down as ninth. But yeah,
That'd be incredible.
I think it's actually meant to be the top seven. Yes.
But the other two non-European places, we'll say for the time being, I have Brighton in ninth, Everton in eighth.
Okay.
Um, I try not to take too much out of preseason football, and I have been a little bit degenerate with how much I've watched, just because I've missed watching club
Hmm.
football so much. And
Yeah.
I mean, in America now, we get more coverage of meaningless games than we ever have. So
Hmm.
I called myself slow day at work the other day watching Everton Newcastle. I think it was in Scotland, and they were showing it on CBS. And again, try not to take too much away from preseason because
Yeah.
so many people end up getting too hyped, or they don't take enough from preseason, whatever the case may be. I thought that Everton played phenomenally the other day against Newcastle, and I like a lot of the signings that they brought in because, especially, they played very well in that game. And I just think when you look at the players that they've brought in, and you look at the team that they've been able to keep, very similar to the one that they had last year.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, the retirement of Seamus Coleman, even though he wasn't as big a factor as he's been in the past, that was still a pretty big blow. But bringing in Brennan Johnson in a swap that I thought was absolutely horrid. If you're Crystal Palace, I have no idea what you're doing. I I don't think Brennan Johnson is the greatest player ever, but I genuinely thought like a straight swap. I thought if that was going to happen, that Crystal Palace could have gotten a little bit more out of Brendan Johnson. But regardless, I think that's a great signing for Everton. I think Dwight McNeil was definitely not wanting to stay there, and it was clear the whole controversy with his girlfriend or whatever it was wanting to move to London. All of that drama. Finally, that's been dealt with. Bringing in Christian Norgard, who didn't play that many games for Arsenal last year, but he's shown in that Brentford midfield how dependable he can be, and if anything, just a great mentor and leader in that dressing room. Hayden Hackney, who one of the premier young talents of the championship, bringing him in, and then securing Merlin Roll on a permanent deal. It looks like they're going to do the same with Tyreek George. I just think that's a great window, in my honest opinion, and I think Everton do have a chance of eighth, maybe seventh, but I do think that they are destined for some kind of Europe this season.
Yeah, I think what they've done is they've put together a really good team, and I think Moyes has continued to be one of the most overlooked and underappreciated Premier League managers in the
Absolutely.
history of the Premier League. The stuff he did for West Ham, twice they got rid of him, twice they fell apart almost completely without him. Even with people who some would argue are better managers. If you look at Nuno, a lot of people would probably put Nuno as a better manager than David Moyes, but Nuno goes in to West Ham to eventually replace him and ends up getting him relegated. This is Moyes has been criminally overlooked his whole career, and even
Hmm.
now there are Everton fans who are planning for life without him, which feels insane to me. But I think Eddie Howe hitting the market has maybe got a few people interested. I think they've put together a really good team. I have um, two problems that I think will maybe just stop them short of Europe. And one of them is the striker position, and then
Hmm.
less important than that is right back. Um, Barry and Beto are, for my money, two of the least consistent potential starting number nines in the
Yeah.
Premier League across the entire league, and we can throw in the newly promoted clubs for that because look, Ollie McBurney might not be up to much, but he's consistently not up to much at least, and he will still score goals every now and again.
Yeah.
Barry, I feel like the only time I've seen him do anything good was when he scored those goals against Man City, which were very well taken goals and very, very good movement in behind. Beto, it feels like, is much more capable of having a physical battle with defenders. You know, I understand that he's got this physicality, this willingness to have that battle and sort of bully defenders and create space for his teammates around him. I always feel like when Barry comes on, Everton just lose something, and he's sort of better when he starts because he can work his way into the game a bit more. But I don't know if I see enough from either of them to feel like one of them will score even 10, 15 goals this season, and that'll be enough
Yeah.
to drive them on. If they sign a striker, I'm totally, totally with you. I think Europe is on the cards because defensively, they've got great players across the board. You know, that centre back foursome that they've got of Branthwaite, Tukowski, Jake O'Brien, Michael Keane, all of them competitive. Two of them very experienced, two of them quite young, but so physically imposing it's almost impossible to believe. Left back is pretty meh. Midfield is great. Right back, they need someone because Jake O'Brien is 6'8" or some nonsense like that. They can't keep putting him out at
Yeah.
right back. Um, and Merlin Roll is, has done okay there in pre-season, has been competitive, but I think when you get to one-on-one defending against really tricky wingers, probably a risk that he ends up sort of being left in the dust. I put them in 10th in mine, Everton, so I think quite
Okay.
closely packed. But
Yeah.
I agree with you that they have a lot to be confident about, a lot to be optimistic about, and I don't know whether they're going to manage it. I don't know whether they're even trying to. But if they do manage to get a striker and a right back in the next couple of
Yeah.
weeks, I'll feel quite confident and bullish about them going into the new season. Because I like Moyes, I like the team that they've built, and I think they'll make it really difficult to beat them.
I think keep it for me also with Everton. I mean, it's the trouble about doing this before the season, about a week before the season starts, is even though the season starts, the transfer window is still open, and while it looks like Jimmy Garner and Iliman Njai are going to stay,
Mm-hmm.
Njai is the one who is, I don't know, maybe a team will make a late push for him because he's just so
He's
talented. And
brilliant. Yeah.
uh, no offense to Everton at all. I think Everton fans would agree with me, but he could hold his own at a bigger club, whether that be a team in the top six or a team in Italy or Spain or Germany. I think he could very much hold his own. And
Yeah.
at the age, I think he's 25, 26. This is about the time where you want to start making that big move. And
Yeah.
who knows, maybe as the transfer window keeps going, he realizes that. But I don't think there's really any harm in keeping in him staying around for one more year. But that is just something that's it. That is an unknown. That's a question mark. Will we say they need to bring in a right backer and a striker, but who knows? Did they bring in guys like did they bring in guys like Tyreek George or um, Brennan Johnson because they're afraid that Njai
Beto isn't done. Yeah.
might be on the go. So I don't know if they do lose him and I don't think they'll lose Garner, but if they do lose some big players, maybe we come back and revisit this. But um, I like where I have them in
Yeah.
between eighth and 10th. I think that's fine. I want to talk now about the top six. I know we've been going for a little bit, so I want to just I want to make sure, of course, that we get the
Yeah,
biggest
get the
that we
trophies.
get these teams in,
Hmm.
and so I'll say for my final non-Champions League spots. So I've got in seventh, I've got Aston Villa. I think
Yeah,
with
same.
them losing Morgan Rogers was definitely a blow, but I still think Unai Emery is so incredibly talented, and he's got a squad that he still trusts.
Yeah.
I saw the other day this kid, whatever, they're
Right.
6'4",
Ryan
like
Maggio.
yeah, jacked dude, scored for them against PSG. He looks. I mean, I don't want to put too much stock in him too early on, but he looks like an absolute unit.
He does.
Um, what you're able to ask of him at the age of 17 in a demanding season like this, I don't know, but I like him a lot. I just think besides losing Morgan Rogers, they kept a lot of the crux of this team.
Hmm.
Whether Emiliano Martinez ends up leaving, I don't know. He's been linked a lot with Italy, but if he does stay, keeping that core together besides Rogers, I think
Yeah.
will put them in a position to finish somewhere like seventh. And then sixth, I have Spurs. This is from 17th to 6th.
Hmm.
That'd be unbelievable. What do you think?
I've put them in the same place. I think I'm still not sold on them going forward, and I've sort of done this under the presumption that they will sign
Yep.
someone else. Um, but I think gives them a chance really is that they've had some time under De Zerbi anyway. A fair few of the Spurs players weren't called up to the senior squad, so they've had full pre-seasons under the manager, as well as having a couple of games at the end of last season to get used to his style, to get used to his methods. When you look at clubs like Chelsea, who a lot of people are touting for very big things this season, they those players met Xabi Alonso a couple of months ago, and then have made some new signings, and yes, there's excitement there and stuff like that, but I think adjustment time wise, Tottenham are going to be in a really good position, and their
Yeah.
squad isn't quite good enough yet, in my mind, to properly compete for the Champions League. But if you run through their squad now, it is substantially better than it was last year. The centre back pairing Van der Ven, Van Hecke, great. Kinski obviously had a nightmare against Atletico in the Champions League last season, but was brilliant when he came back in. Um, Mateus Fernandez and Tonali will make a very, very good midfield. They've also got options like Archie Gray in there as well, who can compete. Conor Gallagher also. It's just the attack where questions come in. They will get
Yeah.
Kudus back at some point. They will have Madison back to full fitness at some point. But it looks like their front four for the opening day is likely to be something like Richarlison, Gallagher, Mateus Tell, and Solanke,
Yeah.
and that isn't the best. So I just don't think they'll
No.
score enough goals at this point. I think Solanke is that good, has just been injured for years and years, so we don't know if he can be that good again. Um, but no, I like them at sixth. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And then in fifth, in taking the last Champions League spot, I've already gotten some stick from a couple of friends of mine asking why I have them this low. I have Manchester United.
Okay.
And this was the team where I was like, where I wanted to mention them after because while I understand, look, they're coming off of finishing third, they performed very admirably under Michael Carrick, and I think that if he can get them to buy in season for a full season, there is a good possibility that they could finish third again or fourth.
Yeah.
My issue with Manchester United is if you look at the teams that I have above them, so, well,
Hmm.
just if you look at, and you know which teams I have above them now,
Yeah.
but if you look at them, they just, it's, it's interesting because in my mind, I thought Manchester United benefited from not playing any European football and being able to play once a week, being able to have guys like Casemiro, Luke Shaw, um, Harry Maguire, guys who have struggled with injuries and struggled with fitness in the past, be able to play one game a week and it was not as, taxing on their bodies. Whereas now you've got Champions League football, and you've really only brought in two players so far who
Yeah.
are going to be first team regulars in Andre Santos and Yuri Tielemans. good signings. I don't take that away from them at all. But I just think, in my mind, this team, when you look at the spend that Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City, and Arsenal have had so far, even though I think Liverpool haven't spent as much as they're going to, it just doesn't compare with those other teams. Those other teams, it's what I said before about, having to pay above the means to get what you want, and it seems like this ownership and this board are just do not want to play by those rules at all, and they want to wait for reasonably priced signings when, in my lifetime, that's not really what Manchester United have been. So it seems like an identity crisis in some aspect to me.
Yeah, no, look, I agree. I think what Man United have tried to do is realise that they've had some positive signs last year under Carrick, and they've gone for consistency rather than, spending a lot in a transfer window where they don't really know who they need and what they need. So I think there will maybe be one or two more coming in, but I think what they wanted really was to have a consistent season. And I think there are a couple of issues with that. Left back, right back, notably, are the two that come to mind most. Um, but I do think that, again, what they'll have on their side is the consistency of having played with all of the same players last year for the most part. They've got two midfielders who are
Hmm.
brilliant. Tielemans has been brilliant for Villa, and was brilliant for Leicester. Andre Santos didn't get much of a chance at Chelsea last year, but is definitely more reliable than a 38-year-old Casemiro. I know that's exaggerating, but that's what it
Yeah,
felt like watching
yeah.
him play. So they've gone for consistency, and I don't mind it. And obviously, we're going to talk about the three teams above this. Man City, Liverpool, and Chelsea. I think Man United have gambled on the fact that those teams will have to transition slightly, whereas they can just hit the ground running because they're used to the same players. Will that backfire? Possibly. But I do have them in fourth rather than in fifth. And the team that
Okay.
I put them above is Liverpool.
Yeah, just flip flop for me. I have Liverpool in fourth. I
Mm.
think this is going to be a year where their main signings from last year, I think this is make or break for them, for Isak, for Verts. I
Mm.
know Verts had a pretty decent second half to his season last year, but Isak, especially with having Ekatike out for quite some time, um, the burden's really going to be put on him to score goals for Liverpool. And if he can show even 75% of the form that he had in his last year at Newcastle, I think that could be, he could fit that situation like a glove.
Yeah.
I think Liverpool, I think they will. The thing is, I think they will be better than they were last year, but I have them a space low. They finished. Oh no, this is exactly where they finished last year. I'm sorry, I got them confused. But I just think with Liverpool, I love. You still have guys that still need to go in Cody Gakpo, and they still have some guys who probably um, will leave. I'm trying to see if I am forgetting signings that they've made. I know that they're in for Barcola, Araujo, who they brought in from Barcelona. I
Yeah.
think is
That's a good
a
signing.
little. I'm not completely sold on him just because I know from the Barcelona games that I've watched, I know
Mm.
that he has a mistake in him, and every defender does. But
Yeah.
in a space where you're losing Konate and you
Mm.
sort of Joe Gomez is another year older, you need. I thought they would get somebody a little bit more solid, but
Well,
he's fine.
they do have Jacquet, don't
Yeah,
forget the French centre back. He
of
obviously has
course.
just arrived and has been injured the whole time. But I think it's likely that the reason that Araujo's come in is basically is he can play centre back and right back. He's on loan for the year. There's an option to buy for 55 million. So if you do
Yep.
recapture the best of his form that he showed under Xavi Hernandez when he was in charge of Barcelona, then that's a great win. If he is inconsistent as he has been in the last couple of years, you let him go back to Barcelona at the end of the season, and there's no risk really, but there's a potential of a big reward.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I agree with you. I think they've got some opportunity, and Iriola will excite me watching them.
Yeah. That's
But
their
I
biggest
think
signing of the window, honestly.
definitely, but I think whereas some games with Arne Slot, they played badly and won 1-0. I think it's more likely that this season they'll play really well in most of their games, but are more likely to lose 1-0 in some, or lose 2-1, or drop a
Yeah.
point in the last minute, because this is a drastically different style of play than it was under Slot, and a drastically different set of players than it was in Klopp's last season too. So you can't even really fall back on the muscle memory from that time. So
Yeah.
this is going to be big for them, a big transition, and I think they'll struggle with it. Now I'm aware that you have to leave in like 8 minutes, so are we
I
smashing through these last three?
we'll go through the top three.
Yeah,
Give them the respect that they deserve, but also, we'll do it on a hop a little bit. Chelsea, I mean, you could have an hour long conversation just about what Chelsea have done in the transfer window and since the last game of last season. But bringing in Xabi Alonso as their manager, not as
yeah,
their head coach, I thought that was absolutely huge.
hmm
Putting, giving jobs to managers again, I thought was an incredible sign from Chelsea. And I think that their signings, I mean, I have loved Chelsea's window. I
hmm
mean, I think they've done everything that you could. Overpaid for a guy like Morgan Rogers, and maybe for someone like Maxence Lacroix, from Crystal Palace. But they've also brought in two guys from the retirement home, essentially, who I think probably won't play all that much, but I think are the antithesis of what Todd Bowley and this Chelsea regime have been about. It's insane. Talk to me 3 years ago and tell me that Danny Welbeck and Jordan Henderson would be playing for them 3 years from
yeah,
then. They'd be like, "Are you kidding me?
it's
What are you
insane.
talking about?" But
Yeah,
they
I
also
mean,
brought. I'm sorry.
go on. No, please, after you.
I was just going to mention as well, and then bringing in young guys like Marco Palestra, who is going to play that. It basically confirmed that Xabi Alonso is going to play a three at the back and is going to stick to his morals, what he did so well at Bayer Leverkusen. Giovanni Kenda, who could probably play on the other wing back or a bit further forward. I just think I wouldn't say I was in love with their transfer window, but I just thought it was so interesting with what they did. Whether they're going to be good signings or not, I think they went for it, and that's exactly what I think Chelsea should do.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think it's too soon to be talking about a title challenge or a real consistent title challenge over the course of
Hmm.
this year. But I agree completely. They've shown a ranged approach to the transfer market. Xabi Alonso has clearly come in and, in the same way as he did with Xhaka at Leverkusen, has said, "Hold on, I want some experience in this team. Let me bring in a couple of players." Brought in Welbeck, brought in Henderson, players who will be able to run the dressing room, which was a big problem under Rossini, was that the players were young and idiots sometimes, a
Yep.
lot of the time, showing basic lack of respect, showing up late, and Rossini didn't really have a way to manage that. So having a couple of players who have played at elite clubs before, played for their national teams, will be able to help manage that. Rodgers is a brilliant signing. Palestra is a cheap and brilliant signing compared to a lot of other Chelsea signings, so that was a
Yeah.
delight to see. Lacroix, I'm up and down on. I see the logic. I think he's a good centre back. He's maybe not the best centre back at Palace, but he does have brilliant recovery pace and will fit into a back three
Yeah.
very well because he's been there, done that. So I've got them in third at the minute. I'm open to
As
that
do
moving
I.
up to second, depending on how Maresca does at Man City, which we'll get onto now. But the position to keep an eye on at Chelsea is goalkeeper for me, because I think Mike Panda has been touted as the next Thibaut Courtois for a while. Has come back to Chelsea this year, and it's never really felt like Robert Sanchez is completely settled in that number one role.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes.
Going with Manchester City, as you just mentioned, I think they had, like Chelsea, a very notable summer, whether that
Yeah.
be good or bad. It was very notable as a lot of stuff happened. Pep Guardiola, their greatest manager in club history, one of the greatest managers in Premier League history, departed, and in his place was his former assistant coach, Enzo Maresca, the former manager of Chelsea. And I think that they well, I maybe would have liked to see them, and he still could be backed a little bit more, but with their links to Enzo Fernandez and some other players. But I think bringing in so far they've really only brought in one consistent first team player in Elliot Anderson, but what a first team signing to make. I mean, he was one of the best midfielders in the Premier League for a very I want to say very poor because they stayed up, but a quite poor Forest team. And by that I just mean, you know, he had a lot to do in that Forest team, and he took that pressure and he played very, very well. Um, Again, the fee is a lot bigger than I think a lot of people thought it was going to be. It ended up being around 116 million, which maybe that's inflated, maybe it's not. Maybe that'll end up being cheap, the same way that some people say that Declan Rice's fees, 100 million was cheap for Declan Rice. Maybe we'll be saying the same thing about Elliot Anderson in a couple of years. You never know. But this is another situation where Man City wanted their guy. They said, this is the person that we want to build our new midfield around, and we're going to pay whatever it takes to get him. And it's kind of the issue that I had with Manchester United with, if you really want someone and you think this person is going to be a difference maker at your club, you need to pay whatever it is you need to pay. But again, we left Manchester United in the past. I'm not talking about them anymore. Man City, I think they are probably going to be the busiest in the last 3 weeks with the links of Rodri to Barcelona, Enzo Fernandez potentially coming in. There's still some places where I think that they still could improve. I think um, at that right back position, I think it's still a little bit um, up in the air. I know they like Matheus Nunez, but will Maresca see him as the guy? I know they've been linked to Malo Gusto and some other right backs. Um, I think with them as well, it's about Maresca. Obviously, he can't be thinking I need to be like Pep. He needs to be his own man, in my opinion. Bring in his own ideas, and I, I still think they could finish second, but I could see them finishing as low. Like, they are so unpredictable. I feel like Man City are this year. I think I have them finishing second, but would not shock me to see them finish third or fourth either.
Yeah, for me, the squad looks strong enough to finish second, but Pep couldn't get basically the same team to beat Arsenal last season. I don't expect Maresca to be able to do that
Yeah,
this season. I think he's a worse manager. I think he's got a different style, so there's going to be some adapting, and I think he's probably going to end up dropping Haaland at some point because he can't quite do the passing that he wants him to do. They'll
yeah,
lose a couple of games and he'll end up getting sacked. So I think City could finish second, could look comfortable. This could be a good year of adapting to Maresca, but equally it could all go wrong. And
yeah,
regardless of who they sign in the last couple of weeks of the transfer window, it's not going to change my opinion that Arsenal will win the league again this year. Um, so yeah, like that. Basically, what Man City do in the next couple of weeks or so, unless it's something outrageous, I don't think is going to change my opinion on the result of this season, which, as I say, is Arsenal
yeah.
finishing out on top.
I obviously I agree. I think I've been, I don't want to say underwhelmed by the business that we've done, but when you're linked with Vinicius Jr. and things fall apart, I mean, it does. When you come so close, and it's not just a tabloid rumor that,
Mm.
oh, Vinicius Jr. could be unsettled at Real Madrid, maybe go to Arsenal or Man City, but whatever. Like, it was genuine interest. It was actually got a lot further than a lot of people thought.
Yeah,
And well, I know that he's going to stay. I still think we've done a good job of bringing in someone to supplement our options at left wing. I still think that we need an everyday somebody who is going to be better than Trossard, someone who can properly replace him
yeah,
and properly is better than Gabriel Martinelli. No offense, I think Martinelli's a good player, but if we want to stay in a position where we can win the league and win the Champions League, that needs to happen. But bringing in Bruno Guimaraes, I think was just an incredible signing, and while there were times that I thought this probably isn't going to happen, I don't think Newcastle are going to part with their captain. Just now that we're able to sort of give Declan Rice a little bit of a rest when he needs it.
Yeah.
He's played so much football in the past 12 months, and even further beyond that. But I just think did what we had to do, and anything anything more than this is just icing on the cake, I would say.
Yeah. Agreed. I like the signing of Solis. I think he's got potential and can nail down that left wing position. Given a bit of a run, he's obviously still young, and you've still got Eze who can step in and play in that position too, and it did so to varying degrees of success last year. I still have question marks over striker position. I think between Havertz and Gyökeres, you've got enough quality there clearly to win the
Hmm.
league, but are either of them really consistent enough in front of goal to set you out ahead of everyone else? Not in the same way, I don't think.
Yeah,
But what I will say is you have the strength defensively to keep any team out. You have the ability in midfield to change a game with two substitutes. If you're starting with Guimaraes, Rice, and Erdegaard, that gives you the option of bringing on Lewis Skelly and Eze if you want to go more attacking. It gives you the potential of bringing on Marino and Zubimendi if you want to hold on to the ball more and risk it less. So you have this brilliant range of options in this team across the board, and
yeah,
I think you've got the experience of winning the league now. I think that will make it easier this time around too. So yes, Arsenal are
yeah.
mine. Yes.
This is gonna be this is gonna be such an interesting season. I'm really really looking forward to it. A week from when we are recording this,
Hmm.
I want this to come out either later today or tomorrow, depending on when I get the time. But
Hmm.
thank you guys so much for watching, Theo. Always, always, always a pleasure, my friend.
No,
Always a
likewise. It's been
pleasure
a lot of fun.
bending your ear and being able to, talk with someone who is more passionate than me about this, and someone who understands what I'm talking about, doesn't just look at me like I'm speaking another language when I
No,
talk
no,
about the
I'm with you,
Prem.
man.
So
With you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, my friend. Until next time, it won't be as long until we speak again, but
No,
um, take care of
we'll
yourself, all right?
let's pencil it in for the end of the transfer window, shall we? We can react to
Yeah,
someone
we
else
can.
signing Vinicius and just really rubbing it in for you.
Oh, God, that better not be the case. But anyway, take care, my friend. Have a good one.
See you soon. Ta-ra.